What's up, world? It's your boy, Mike Muse, from the Conversation on Mike Muse Show. I am so excited to be in conversation with all four of these gentlemen that are assembled here with me. One is no stranger to the Mike Muse Show. This is, I believe, my third or fourth time being in conversation with the Ryan Coogler. What's happening, Ryan?
Man, just here with this amazing film.
Yeah.
And with this amazing filmmaker and incredible subjects of it.
I love it. And we're twinning right now with our denim jackets.
Yeah. Look at that.
I appreciate the denim look, man.
I try to do the denim. I can't pull it off.
It's denim light.
Denim light.
I would say. And the voice which you're hearing right now is the incredible director of the film Anthem and partner in the production company Proximity Media. What's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing good. How you doing?
I can't complain, man.
Right.
I will give you a little bit of credit because at least the shirt is bluish.
Bluish, yeah. I was told to try the blue.
Yeah.
I was going to wear gray, but I was advised against it.
Now, I think blue works better for you. Yeah. I've learned to learn my palette. For me, I've learned that wine. So I wear like these jackets and people call it Merlot. So I was like, I didn't know that was a thing. But so now my colors are Merlot and burnt orange. So never thought we'd have this conversation, did you? To start the conversation off.
Hey, we'll go wherever you want to take it.
Yeah. And to the left, we have the incredible DJ and producer, Dahi. How are you, sir?
Incredible.
I can't wait to be in conversation with you. Fun fact, world, he produced my nephew's album and is one of the creative collaborators for a lot of projects, man. Sam Du.
That's my bro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another fun fact, he and I were at the same wedding, which was Sam's wedding. And audience and for the panelists right here, we talked about that table so much, Ryan. They were the cool kids at the wedding. They didn't dance. They didn't get up and talk to nobody. They just sat with each other the entire time. And I told Sam, I was like, that must be your music friends. Yep. And he was like, yeah, it is. And then the man, the myth, the legend, finally, I have this gentleman on my show, audience. Finally, Kris Bowers is here. Yes, the Kris Bowers, who I only talked about during the Chevalier time period. But Kris and I, we first met at the Oscars. I created a film summit called Careers in Films, where we bring about 1,000 students from South Central Los Angeles learning the art of filmmaking. And Kris Bowers was part of our second installment, I believe. I had the chance to interview there for the music panel, and I've just been a fan ever since.
Oh, I appreciate that. Same. Yeah. Thanks so much.
No, congratulations, man. To see you two go on this journey together, this road trip to really redefine the Anthem and the Star Spangled Banner was such a journey for me. I was super excited for it. But Peter, it leads me right to you because what you all may not know is that Jimi Hendrix, Star Spangled Banner rendition is the muse to the work that I do. And so I'm known to intersect politics and pop culture. And so I've always talked about his rendition of Star Spangled Banner, which to me represented freedom. And it represent reimagining our democracy. And so I've been studying this piece now for about 15 years as the bedrock of the work that I do to get more people engaged into our democracy, right? And so I was waiting for the moment. I didn't know if he was going to be in your piece, but then I kept waiting like, come on, they got to bring up Jimmy. They got to bring up Jimmy. And then he arrived, right? So talk to me. How did you think about the Jimi Hendrix Star Spangled Banner, and why was that important to include it in the moment that you did it in the piece? Because it was well positioned.
I mean, people ask me oftentimes, you get asked that question, what's your favorite movie, what's your favorite song, or what's the impactful book that you've read? And there's so many that you search for it. But Hendrix's version of the Star Spangled Banner has always been at the forefront of, something that I saw at a young age that just blew my mind, of somebody who kind of deconstructed something that was familiar, made the familiar unfamiliar. I don't think the first time I saw it, I understood maybe the political sort of implications of it. I was much more focused on the creative, how he was lost in his voice in that moment, how he became one with the guitar and just sort of forgot about what was behind it. And that spirit, in a lot of ways, sort of led to the creation of this project that, we can take things that are familiar and make them unfamiliar, but what's the intention behind that and why?
When I think about that rendition, I can't help but think about like this activism spirit, right? So like for me, I immediately went to like protest, right? I immediately went to just unlocking yourself from like these norms. And I think about Oakland, Ryan, as like the bedrock of like activism. Like that's one of the first places I think about. Is that what gravitated towards you to produce this piece with these three other gentlemen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm from Oakland, and my wife, Zinzi Coogler, and I, and Sev Ohanian, when we founded Proximity Media, what we were trying to do was to bring audiences in closer proximity to subjects that are often overlooked, but specifically through like eventized content, you know. And when we recruited Pete to come aboard and join us as founders and run the nonfiction part of our company, he had this idea, you know, this Anthem idea. He had been working on it, and it had taken on like different versions, you know. I remember, but we were so excited about this project, you know. And this is a while back, you know. But you know what more? I guess it's an extremely great example of that idea, you know. And it feels like an event. This idea, oh man, musicians are gonna have a conversation around the anthem, and not just critique it or talk about it, but you know, come up with an attempt at what one would sound like if it were made today, and one that was truly rooted in. You talk about the bedrock, truly rooted in American music, because you learn through the film that the music that is the what the Star Spangled Banner is based on is like a British pub song, you know. And the irony of that is not like it wasn't lost on Pete as a filmmaker or these two as musicians. So it was interesting seeing them first ask themselves, all right, what's true American music, you know, and how can we reflect that now? That process was just fascinating, and I think, you know, what they've created is something that is an event, you know.
I couldn't agree with you more. Like, my audience knows this too as well. Like, I'm not a huge fan of documentary work for a multitude of reasons. But because sometimes I feel like it's too from cradle to grave. Like, they throw everything at you in the kitchen sink. But I really felt like this was such a linear, which I am going to talk to you about pretty soon. So I was really interested in the construction.
You're watching the wrong documentaries. I need to give you a playlist after the interview.
I am open to it. But that's just a testament, so that I do find one that I like. I really love it, right? But feeling like the event, the journey of the road trip, and I've seen these road trip documentaries and shows done so much, but it's never really connected. It felt very gimmicky. But what I loved is that you two are actually masters of your craft of music, so the authority was there that I trusted in. And then what I really appreciated was a curiosity that you guys had. Like, you guys come into these different cities as being the experts. I'm curious because Ryan talked about proximity in American landscape and culture. The moment that stood out to me is when you guys went to Tulsa and you spoke to the indigenous musicians. And I actually paused the screener after the lady said, indigenous music has been left out of the musical landscape of American music. And I've never even thought that I was even missing indigenous music into that. I'm just curious, like, how did that feel in that moment for you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely really impactful, because similarly, I felt a sense of frustration and maybe even a bit of shame to not have thought of that before as well. And it was kind of an aha moment to listen to some of their singing and feel like, other than the language, like melodically and like emotionally and spiritually, and in terms of the intention behind it, it sounded like a Negro spiritual. It sounded like, you know, like slave songs. Like it really made it obvious how close those cultures were at the time in the beginning of this country, and to not have known that some of that musical influence came from those cultures, I think was definitely eye-opening. Yeah,
I didn't even think Dahi that they were grasping that. Like, I never made that connection of like gospel music, folklore, slave, like revolution. I never grasped that like whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I think during this whole experience, I really realized how young America is. You know what I'm saying, in relative to the world. You know, and how you know, if you think about over time, and we think our 1776, and we think that's the day America starts, but you know, it's before then. You know what I'm saying? And I think just going to Tulsa and learning as much as we could in that time span about, you know, Native music was like really impactful to just like the roots of the land, and you know how we can't forget that, because we're standing on it every day. So it was beautiful. I think it was just like Kris said, it was more of like you think you know everything, but you don't, and that was like a total eye-opening experience and just make me prospectively look at like how we have to include as many voices as possible.
Yeah. Dude, I want to come to you now because, you know, another part that came, about including everyone, right? I think for me, what made this documentary so well, it was that it was so linear. And that you could have went in so many different directions with the cuts and the edits, and you could have went so much deeper. How did you know how to pull back and how to edit? Because the point I wanted to go into is when you discussed jazz in New Orleans. You could have went so much further with the port system and all that coming into it. So how did you know to pull back, and how did you know what to include?
Well, it was a challenge. You know, initially, Kris and I first started talking about the film probably 4.5 years ago, and I think the initial exploration was rooted a little bit more in the history of the Star Spangled Banner. You know, the notion of what was happening today, this collision of patriotism and protest, the canceling of statues and flags, and the calls to replace the anthem began an inquiry into the song itself, which leads to obviously history. That pretty quickly led to this notion that we could tell that history, and then at the end of the movie have Kris compose an anthem that would reflect America today. And then that quickly led to, and I was imagining maybe Kris in his studio, maybe calling up a friend like Dahi and composing a song. That would probably be beautiful. But the more we started thinking about that, the more we realized that that's an audacious task. How do you cannot do that task without a journey to explore what is the American sound, what is the American voice, and that led to this notion. We started thinking about places we could visit, maybe in research trips, to get some of those answers and those insights, and then that led to, well, if we're going to go to these cities, like, and film them, let's like get an RV, let's like do a road trip, and then that became like, oh, this is actually a road trip. This is a movie about the creation of something, not the looking back at something and looking forward. And so that's when the framework for the film really became established.
And I think that's the part that I enjoyed because I do enjoy the study of music. I always talk about, Black people, we have our own migration story, like the Great Northern Migration, and really to look at how the music kind of even explored, like from the Delta of the Mississippi, onward to jazz, to Detroit, where you guys went to. I talk about that. But Ryan, I've been really fascinated in Oakland because so much of that transition out west with that. Did you have a lot of musical? How much does music influence the work that you do? Because just thinking about from the films that you make, I feel like music has always been very centered in your work.
It is. Music is, I think, the first art form that I felt attached to. It was the first art form that I think I was cognizant of my relationship with, even though I'm I didn't grow up as a musician. My younger brother is a musician, and that was what, it's the most immaterial art, right? Like, so it's what's there in my memories with my dad. I think about my dad. I think about riding around Oakland in his car listening to "Let Me Ride" on tape. You know what I'm saying? Cassette tape. First movie he took me to see was Boys in the Hood. Ice Cube was in that movie. You know what I mean? And I knew he was Ice Cube. So I can't remember not feeling like I had ownership over. I would say hip hop, but just like black music. You know what I'm saying? And in the Bay when I was coming up, you had Hammer, you had Short, you had 3 Times Crazy, 40. And then we would also listen to like Sly Stone, and that was there. It's this idea that like not only is this form of cultural representation exists, but we also have ownership in it. Us here in this place, you'll hear Bay Area artists on the radio, and for that, like that was everything, man. To this day, when I sit down and make a movie, I'm thinking about that. I think like, man, I want this movie to make people feel like how I felt when I heard this particular song, and you look at, if you ever, when I go to concerts, the type of people that you find at concerts, sometimes it's what you expect, but oftentimes it's surprising, like this idea of music bringing people together. You know, and so all of that's there, man. And we have a music division at our company, run by Archie Davis and Ludwig Göransson. You know, both guys are friends of these two. These two guys here. You know, we worked with Kris on Space Jam: A New Legacy. You know, and for us as a company, music is extremely important to us, and we really wanted to do a good job for Pete, good job for these guys, and for Onyx, and supporting this film, because it had all of the things we care about in it. You know.
But like you said, like music makes you feel, right? And I think for me, that was an overarching theme of this documentary, is that, you know, what makes people want to sing the anthem, right? Like they want to feel it, to see it, to be moved by it in order to do it, which is, to me, why in your movies, to me, music's always been the secondary and sometimes even the primary, you know, characters when it comes to that. I want to come to you two gentlemen because really what Ryan is saying, to me, got illuminated in Clarksville, Mississippi, right? And about the blues. And I'm always talking about juke joints, right? And there's something about, you talked about Boys in the Hood, I think about Color Purple, right? Going down to the juke joint, right? Where they was performing. But I always just looked at it from a place of like revelry. But you guys make me change that perspective of the juke joint. It was almost about healing. When they would work in the fields, they said, and then they would come and just release. What did that mean for you when they talked about music as healing and releasing?
Yeah, I think it just echoed my connection with music, because that's like really the only reason why I fell in love with music. Like my parents wanted me to play piano when I was like before I was born, and so it definitely was like their vision for me to be a musician. And when I was like 4, I started lessons, and around 8 or so I was like more interested in like playing outside or doing something else, and they put me in jazz lessons. But through those lessons I learned how to improvise, and all of a sudden for me it was like I can play where I'm feeling or what I'm feeling, and like now all of a sudden this became a vehicle of expression. And I feel like, you know, there's so many spaces where I didn't feel like I could articulate how I felt, or maybe I didn't know how to articulate how I felt. And I feel like I'm much better at articulating feeling through music. And so hearing them talk about that, or hear Terry, the harmonica player, tell those stories, I feel like it's like speaks to the long tradition, especially for Black people in this country, or, you know, anyone that's struggling, that there might not be either space for an outlet verbally. You know, you might not feel like you can you know, do anything about your life situation essentially, but to be able to pick up an instrument and like play, you know. And I think that's why I always really love the blues, because you listen to some of those amazing blues musicians from back in the day, like they're not the best technicians. Like sometimes like they're like playing with form. Like I don't even know if they really know what they're doing. They're just like, I can't help but express what I'm feeling right now through this instrument. And to hear him speak to that and really like put it in such clear words, I think was really beautiful. Yeah.
I mean, Dahi, I'm just curious to you, for me, what I'm gathering for Kris as, to me, that's equity, right? Like blues and music gives you equity, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, at the end of the day, it's like, at least from my understanding of how music kind of forms and becomes traditional in a lot of ways, like what I loved about the blues music was like the music, like Kris was saying, it doesn't change in a lot of ways. Like I think when we did the jam session, I swear we made the same 5 songs every time we jammed together. But it was cool because it was really like the lyrics and the notion and the expression and the performance aspect was like kind of like the what you focused in on, you know what I'm saying, and how people were telling these stories and how people were expressing, like, you know, like I think Terry was talking about the juke joint, and like it was like after church, you Sunday, you go in, but like that Friday night or that like where I'm done from work, I can kind of just be myself, and I can tell this side of who I really am outside of the church, or outside of, you know, the good I'm putting on for everyone. When I'm in a juke joint, I'm telling you kind of like the truth, you know what I'm saying, of like, well, this is what really happened, this is the faith I'm believing in, this is what I'm going for, this right here is like what I'm dealing with every day. And that was like something I really got as a theme of why that place was vital to that community, you know. So
what I'm smiling at right now is I'm just thinking about, you know, the gentleman's name is Terry, and just thinking about how the juke joint was almost like our version of our New York Times or Washington Post, right?
Yeah.
Like the telling of the story. And sometimes we're always so ridiculed back then because we might not have had the education or the language to express what we felt, right? But like you said, is this long form or is this not long form? You know, proper sentence structure or not, whatever they stated and said, it made you feel, right? I think that's the construct of it, right? And so, Peter, it makes me think about a documentary that I did enjoy was a Zora Neale Hurston doc, to which I learned that she was more than a writer, but she was an anthropologist, right? And from there, she really discovered and tapped and recorded the last known living slave who spoke English, but it was this broken English that was not even Ebonics, but just othering. And the masses didn't feel comfortable with it, so they wouldn't print what she wrote about it, right, in fear of that. And so when I think about Black stories, anthropology, and language, I think music is really the center of all that. It's that gumbo that you hit on.
Yeah, I mean, music can take so many different forms, like Kris and Dahi were saying, there's technical proficiency in music. But you can be technically proficient, but a song won't resonate. It won't hit the soul because the story isn't being told from an authentic place. And I think that you know, that authenticity is so important to the American story, that and pain is a part of that. And church, and I grew up in the Black church, and people coming, and music took the form of sometimes just wailing, and letting it out, and being in a space where you felt held and supported, and I think that's, we've gotten to a point where we don't have enough opportunities for people to express that, but when that is expressed, it can be beautiful.
Yeah.
And so in some ways that notion of bringing in those different life experiences and translating that through music, through the idea of an anthem, because anthems, can both be hopeful, but they can also be authentic and real and hold the pain of reality. And I think that having those two things sitting next to each other is honest to where we're at right now in this country, because there's a lot of difficult energy, and I think in this collective of this country, but there's an opportunity to express through that an authentic voice that is powerful, and I think that's what that idea of an anthem represents.
I never thought about Anthem being hopeful, and so Ryan, I'm curious for you. I know I had a journey with watching this documentary with what I thought about the Star Spangled Banner anthem and just the idea of anthem, right? So, and I ended it differently after watching. I'm just curious, like, what was your initial thought of what you thought this was going to be? And did it change after you watched the conclusion of what they created?
The film or
the song?
The song?
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's a great question. Music's tricky, right? Like, it's funny, it's a line in the film where Dahi's listening in a jam session. He says it feels a little kumbaya, and like it's a trip how that phrase, it's a negative connotation, like man, kumbaya, and I think that like I knew when Pete kind of like walked me through it, and as it shifted towards this road trip, I knew they was gonna walk a razor, it was gonna be on a razor's edge, man, because it can be cheesy and boring real fast, But again, like, I have faith in these guys, and in watching the film, the women that they found, the writers, these are people who are authentically who they are, different ages, different backgrounds, but they're not backing down, they're not shrinking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when they got into that room, as you see in the film, and it was time to put the words with it, man, everybody got their words in there, and in beautiful ways, and it reminded me of the country, like if you're looking for somebody in this country, you'll find them, no matter what you're looking for, and nobody really shrinking, like you got people who are being squished down, you know what I'm saying, but they always fighting back, and I think that for this. it's a high degree of difficulty, but that's always the stuff that's worth doing. You know, that's always the stuff that's worth making an attempt. And it was also like I remember being really hyped when I learned it was gonna be a road trip movie, because music was how I traveled. You know, like I didn't make it to New York, so I was, you know, a working filmmaker. You know what I'm saying? Like, but I knew about New York from listening to, you know, music. You know, like listening to okay, so Marcy, that's in Brooklyn, and you know, okay, Queens is you know, Queensbridge over here, and Bronx is, you know, where hip hop was invented. You know, I knew all of these things. You know, I knew the South that I hadn't been to from the musicians that was coming out of there, who was making what. So I was like, yo, what a beautiful way to do this, because we're gonna travel and discover wild music. But when music was how me and so many other people travel, you know.
I love that, because that ends up giving. That's education. That's what music does, right? It gives you lessons. And when it's done right, it's so visual, right? That you can see it and you can learn from it. I can talk to you guys all day, so I'm not going to keep you. But I kind of want to land the plane eventually. But as we start to descend, I'm really stuck on tension from both the structural filmmaking and both tension from a music making. Because what Ryan said was, this is an event. And it felt like an event. And I think the reason why it felt like an event is because the tension I felt was there a lot. And in particular, when we got into the country section of it, I'm just curious, how did you keep that tension going in that moment when really understanding what is the origin of country music, right? Because there seems to be two different versions of the origins of country music.
I actually love that section because for a few reasons. One, it sort of ties country and the storytelling of country, which is, you know, associated with maybe a white conservative lived experience with the African American experience in terms of the blues, in terms of the narratives and the storytelling. It both challenged, you know, for instance, the origins of country, with the banjo being an instrument that came over on slave ships, with sitting that right next to the authenticity and why people love country music, you know, and that complexity and that sort of juxtaposition, I really felt summed up partly what we were trying to get ultimately in the film itself, but also the song that we were going to create, this new anthem.
I thought that was perfect, because I always talk about country music is rooted in black music, right? And so I always talk about it from the banjo, right? And the origin story of the banjo coming from Sub-Saharan of Africa and the continent. But then it was interesting to see them talking about possibly the Appalachian Mountains, and then it was interesting to see, like, it's the white rural story of their existence is that blues. And so the whole time I was like, no, that ain't it. No, that's not it. Until the subject, she kind of piped up. And so she was like, well, that's a version, but the other version is, and then she introed the banjo. I thought was interesting. I'm going to throw a wild card out, and anyone take this. Because what stood out, maybe the musicians here, is President Nixon's statement on country music. Do you think that is what's maybe solidify that country music isn't from the origin story of black Americans?
Well, I'll just say this.
Anyone feel free to chime in.
Yeah. I think, you know, what I realized about art is, like, I think art is a thing where, you know, it can be perceived just by one voice sometimes. And I think as when you're it's almost like the first person to speak up about, to have a chance to speak about something could be the statement of, like, who this is for and who this represents. Record, yeah. And so I think in general, just from that statement and seeing how, I think a lot of, we were talking about rock music actually. And we were saying, like, a lot for rock music, you know, the face of rock music, you're drilling from a white standstill is like, so it's a white artist, you know what I'm saying? But a lot of the roots, it's a lot of black artists that were kind of at the very forefront of, like, you know, who Elvis got his blues from, you know what I'm saying? So I think in general, you just realize, like, we all have to do our own research about, like, where stuff comes from before you can actually speak on it and have the knowledge. But I think at the end of the day, I think it had a face and it has something that's been used for, you know, whatever reasons. But I do think music is just an interpretation of someone's style and playing and voice and language. And I think at the end of the day, I think we are just making stuff about how we feel, you know?
Isn't that interesting though, how music is sort of connects and bounces off to each other and melds.
Yeah.
And so you have blues, which then becomes rock.
Yep.
You have rap that is discovered by people like the Beastie Boys, who were punk rockers, who then, they're at the forefront of white America adopting hip hop. You have Lil Nas X, took country, sort of reimagined that. And to me, that there's something there that and there's, I don't know, getting into like quantum physics or whatever.
Go there.
Like the ways that we're sort of connected we don't fully understand them, but the connections are there. And going back to Tulsa, this idea of the circle, and going back to, we haven't talked at all about sort of the humanity's connection to the earth. And when you have sort of a common vulnerability, that can lead to insights into how we are all connected. And Joy talking about how we go back, to this earth. So the song has this element of not that it's a climate change movie, but allowing us to think deeper about our connections and what ultimately is at stake.
Audience, one of my favorite parts of the film. Well, there's so many favorite parts of the film, right? I can't pick one because each movement meant something different for me. But really towards the end, and I want to come to you, Kris, it was a creation of the song, right? And so I'm just curious in the creative process. I think there's probably disagreements on like maybe a chord, a note, a melody. But I felt what you guys had to moderate in that group discussion was bigger than music. It was about social issues and individuals' lived identities, right, that they're bringing into the creation of the song. What was that like for you to moderate that session, like a writing session on that level?
Yeah, so basically it started with Dahi and I. When we first got back from the road trip, we just started coming up with little musical ideas that we felt could be like a seed for a song, essentially. And like, with that, it was really Dahi almost talking to me, or us talking about like emotions, or like a director, like talking about like what is the scene we're trying to paint. And then we would like come up with music that felt like that scene. And then we presented all of that to each of the songwriters, and then the music that is the final version of the song was one that we all felt was like the strongest option. But I think that as far as like what it was like in that room, I think there's two aspects of it. One, it's like just really goes down to the vulnerability and the openness of each of those artists, Joy Harjo and Ruby Amanfu and Charity Bowden and Cecilia Pena Govea. I feel like the four women that we brought into this came into it knowing that they each had very different opinions about the anthem, very different opinions about America, and still were willing to put themselves into that space. They were still willing to be vulnerable about like their views and not feel like they needed to like silence their opinions or their views based on, somebody else that was in the room. And I feel like their ability to do that really spoke to how much, I think it all started with Pete, like just the ethos of this and intention behind this film was like, how do we have open conversations, like hold space and make sure that people feel safe to do that. And so I think it really is the fact that they were all willing to express themselves openly and freely and respect one another's opinion, even if there are moments where they kind of disagreed on something. And then I think we also all came in with like that improv sensibility of like yes and it's like there was never a moment where it was like, oh, I don't like that idea, that's not good. It was more so like, okay, let's try that. And then at some point it's like, okay, maybe that idea isn't the idea, maybe this is the idea. So I think it just kind of led to this organic creation process that really just came down to everybody in that space being of a willing mind.
I think that's humanity Pete was talking about, right? Finding the humanity in our differences.
Yeah.
For me, Dahi, you get the last question. I'm just curious, like, what do you hope the song, not the documentary, but what do you hope the song will moderate?
I think for me, I really just hope the song evolves first and foremost, just for the idea of what the song is and how we came to put the song together. I think it was really trying to an attempt to make a song that included more voices in telling, what America is and what it is today, and how it's can change and be, you know, optimistic more than, you know, kind of dividing people or, you know, having a conversation where, you know, people aren't included. I think in general it was we knew it's a big idea, and we were trying to just, you know, throw paint on what we went in our head. It actually came easier for us to just make the song, because at the end of the day we knew, you know, it wasn't about trying to please everyone. It was really just trying to show a different door at the end of the day of where you can go and try to, you know, grow. And I think, you know, we want people to take the song and do something different with it, change it, make your version, make a Bronx version, make a, you know, Oakland version, make a, you know, Houston version, wherever you're from. And I think at the end of the day, it's you know, I think I'm proud of the song. You know, I telling Kris yesterday, I was like, and I hate cheesy stuff, man. It's like cheese.
That's what Ryan was saying.
I have a cheese meter that's like, bro, this is. But you know, as I'm listening to the song more and more, I'm actually like, oh, this is actually really good. You know what I'm saying?
It's a really great song.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even gonna front audience, and like I was, like Ryan said, it was an event. And I kept waiting for them to finally get to the song. And Ryan, you're a director, so I'm sure you can appreciate what you and Pete did. The way you guys held like silence for like 5 to 10 seconds before you played the song, and you saw the back of Dahi's head, and you saw the studio, like the tension was building. I was like, goodness fucking sake, just played the song. And it did not disappoint, and it wasn't cheesy. I don't want to give anything away, but when the songwriter of Indigenous Heritage came in and did what she did, I don't want to give away what she did. That was so powerful to me. That really centered it. I knew I said it was going to be the last question, but it's not. Just in general, it just came to me, Dahi, where you were talking. Are you guys going to work the song like a single? I'm just curious. Like, are you going to, like how you would break a single on radio and the video, like, to get traction out there for it?
So we kind of on like the cutting edge or something in many ways. We still figuring out what's the best approach. But I think we'll make a good one. And once it's out there, man, we're really excited for people to make it their own. You know, Pete. I mean, the film, and listening to these guys talk about it. You know, the film really is like a conversation about ownership and boundaries. You know, and borders. Like, what is a genre but a border? You know what I'm saying? Okay, this is this type of music. That's that. You know, you categorize in something. Maybe it don't need to be categorized. You know what I'm saying? Maybe that categorization hurts more than it helps. You know, and this idea of, you know, if we got a national anthem where certain members of this country feel anxious about it, you know, doesn't make them feel proud necessarily, or brings them something other than joy. You know, I mean, like, we should have a conversation about that. You know what I mean? Like in who gets the right to have that conversation? Shit, we do. You know what I mean? Like is the truth. We can own that conversation. You know, if we can't, that's an issue. You know, because whose conversation is it then? If it's not ours, you know. And I think with that, like they did great work, man, along with this machine, to make sure that the song is public domain. Yeah. So it's not even on legality. Somebody got to get into if they want to make their own version of it. You know what I mean? And put it out.
Yeah. It's almost like open source.
Yeah. It's like immediately
royalty free, the whole nine.
Yeah, and that was important to us.
Get out of here! I didn't even think about that. That's wild. Because I talk a lot about IP on my show, and for you guys to do that is insane. Oh my God, the future is now. Shut up. We should have started with that. You guys buried the lead. We need some journalists on the team, man. Oh my God, that's so great. I mean, wow, that makes it more authentic. Do you know what I mean? Like, it makes it more authentic that this song isn't about monetary gain, right? And that this song is about freedom and getting people to feel hopeful to stand up and to sing something at a football game or a baseball game or something of that nature. Absolutely. Good God, I want to keep talking to you, but we have to wrap at some point. I love you all. Like, you guys, I respect you all for so many different reasons individually. And so a collective, this was a dream conversation for me, because this documentary is the baseline of the work that I do, intersecting culture and societal constructs. And so thank you all. Love you guys. Ryan, Peter, Dahi, Kris. Make sure you stream Anthem on Hulu on June 28th. You would not be disappointed. And I'm sure you guys will have lots of conversations. So maybe I can convince the fellas to come back maybe in September, because I have an idea to work the song right around football season. Until next time, folks. Peace.